Good evening. So the second story says as follows. Omar Rabba, Rabba said, and again, most understand this to mean Rabba bar Chana, Ishtaoli nechuse yama, those who go down to the oceans told me that Bengala legala, between one wave and the next wave, Tlas Mea Parsi, is a distance of 300 parsa, which would roughly be 1,200 miles. Veruma de Gala, and the height of the wave, Tlas Mea Parsi, is also 300 parsa. Zimnachada, one time, Havi Azlinan Ba'orcha, I was going along the way, Vidalinan Gala, and a wave lifted me up, Ad dechazinan, until I was able to see Be Marveise, the resting place, the Kochva Zuta, of a small star. Vahavule Kemivzar Arba'in Grivi Bizra Dechardala, and the space where the star was sitting was enough space to scatter 40 baskets of mustard seed. Vidalinan tfei, and had I been lifted up even higher, havi maklinan mehavle, I would have been burnt by the heat of the star. Viramilo gala kolo lechaverta, and one wave called out to another wave, Chaverasi, my friend, Shavakta midi ba'alma, did you leave anything in the world? Delo shetafte, which you didn't wash away already? Denesi anav vinovde, that I can have an opportunity to come along and destroy it myself? Amarle, so the wave said back, Puk chazi, go out and see Gvorta de Marech, the power of your master. Mole chuta chala, all he puts down is a strand of sand, velo avri, and us waves can't cross it. So we can't just be destroying whatever we want. Shenemar, as the pasuk says in Yirmiyah, Ha'osi lo tiru, do you not fear me? Nu'um Hashem, says Hashem. Imipanai lo tachilu, will you not tremble before my face? Asher samti chol gvul liyam, that I put the sand as the boundary for the sea. Chok olam, in eternal rule, velo ya'av renu, and it will never cross it. So there's a lot of things over here that I'd like to take a little bit of time to understand. First of all, I'll point out to the Maharal in his commentary makes it very clear that when you see numbers like 300 amos, these are never numbers that are meant to be taken in a literal sense. But because he says Chazal, we're never talking about the superficial appearance of things. But when Chazal used numbers, they were trying to give you a sense of the power that's contained within something. And even though the Maharal does not go ahead then to explain this particular Gemara, but we will spend some time understanding what is the symbolism of 300 and, of course, of the waves. What's this resting place of a small star and the mustard? Not all the explanations that we give will explain what the mustard is representing. And then this conversation about how destructive the waves can be and the limitations placed on the waves' ability to be able to destroy. And we're going to be seeing explanations again from the Gra, from Rav Kook, as well as from Rebbe Nachman. So, the Gra says, again, if you remember at the beginning of the previous story, he mentioned that all of these stories are based on Perek Kuf Zayin, chapter 107 of Tehillim of Psalms. So this is going where it mentions over there, Vateromem Galav, that the waves went very high up. And he explains that the waves represent troubles. And it represents the powers of evil, of the Satan. And he says specifically they are represented by the 12 Nisiei Yishmael, the 12 princes of Ishmael. And we'll talk about them a little bit more in Rav Kook's explanation. Each of whom, and those 12 princes of Yishmael are explained in Chumash, their names, and each of them has control over 1 month of the year. And just as a person, the Gemara says, can walk 10 parsaos, 40 miles a day, so also the emissary of each one of these 12 princes of Yishmael, in a spiritual sense, in the month that it controls, it travels 10 parsa each day. And therefore, over the course of a month, it's going to travel 300 parsa. So that's why the Gemara says, the Gemara explains that from one wave to another, it's 300 parsa. That represents what these forces of evil can accomplish over the course of a month. That's also why they're 300 parsa high, because not only are they going in a horizontal movement, but they also go in a vertical movement as well. So one time, as they were going on the way, the Nechusayama, the people who go down to the oceans, told Rabba, they were lifted up by a wave. So these are people who are generally involved in the pursuits of the ocean, the pursuits of this world. But you'll notice over here, it doesn't say they were going on a boat. Rather, it says, Azlinan Ba'urcha. This time they were traveling on the path. And so, like nowadays, we talk about people who have left Torah as they're off the derech, they're off the path. So one day, these people who had generally spent their lives focused on the material pursuits of this world decided to go on the right path. And they were on the derech. But the problem was they started feeling really good about themselves. And then their egos got involved until they saw the resting place of a small star. So we know the pasuk says, "Umatstiki harabim kekochavim leolam va'ed," that the righteous people are like eternal stars. And they were so full of themselves that they started feeling like they were small stars. And actually, the Gemara says the reason why they felt they were small stars is simply because really we all know that stars are, tremendously large. And the reason why they appear small to us is the distance. And these people, as soon as they went on a path of tshuva and started to improve how they were living their lives, they immediately began to feel very good about themselves. And they felt that even though people saw them as small stars, that's only because people didn't fully appreciate them. But really, they were much larger stars than the way in which they appeared. And it was like being involved in these 40 sa'ah of mustard seed. So the Gemara explains the symbolism of the 40 sa'ah is the symbolism of the mikvah. Because a mikvah, in order to purify a person, he has to immerse in 40 sa'ah, it's around 200 gallon of water. So these people also felt that they had immersed themselves within 40 sa'ah. The problem is that even though the Torah does help to purify a person by the study of Torah, it's not just by osmosis. There is no such thing that just automatically, because you're learning Torah, you're going to become a better and a more holy person. Just like when it comes to mustard seed in its natural state is completely inedible. And you've got to take it and pound it, and you've got to grind it until you make it edible. So in the same way, Torah can purify a person, similar to the fact that a mikvah can purify a person, but that's only if the person takes the time to work on himself. If the person pounds at himself and grinds at himself. But of course, the people over here, because of the fact that they've gotten full of themselves once they went on a path of self-improvement, so therefore they're already convinced that they've immersed themselves in the mikvah and they have become these holy, wonderful people. And had they been lifted up any higher, they would have been burnt by the heat. Because the result is that when a person gets too involved in their ego, the next step is anger. That's the heat that we're talking about over here. Because a person who's all involved in his ego and angry, the Shekhinah abandons them. And if the person's ego would get any larger than it is already, the person risks getting destroyed by his own anger. So the wave asks one another, that have you allowed any person to be free of their ego anger? And they said the only ones who are free of ego anger are the real tzaddikim. Because for the real tzaddikim, Hashem places the sand as a barrier and all of our efforts to get them to become full of themselves and therefore to falter don't work. But anybody else is definitely vulnerable to ego leading to anger. That is the Gra's explanation. Rav Kook begins on a similar vein as the Gra, and he also says that the waves symbolize forces that are opposed to us, or at least opposed to us living a good and wholesome life, and being emblematic of the 12 Nesiei Yishmael. And he points out, though, that on the other side, we have a rule called Zelu Umas Zeh. Zelu Umas Zeh literally means this opposite that. And that is that Hashem creates the world in a balance. And that wherever there's forces of evil, there are always counterbalancing forces of good. So if we're seeing these waves representing the 12 leaders of Yishmael, who are forces for evil and trying to get people to err, realize that there are also the Shiftei Yisrael. There are also the 12 tribes, and they counterbalance those 12 princes of Yishmael. He quotes the pasuk, Yatsev Gvulos Amim Kemispar Shiftei Yisrael, that Hashem establishes the boundaries of the nation based on the number of tribes of Israel, because again, it's two oppositional forces that have to exist in counterbalance. And therefore, taking now this idea that the forces of evil described here are counterbalanced by the Shvatim. So he says, where did the tribes of Israel live? In the Midbar, in the desert. So they lived in the camp that we know was 3 parsos in length and width. 3 parsos being roughly 12 miles. Now, there's a general principle in Kabbalah dealing with numbers that when we talk about Olam Ha'asiyah, which is the lowest spiritual world, the one basically in which we operate, we generally speak in digits. We move up to the next world, which is the world of Yetzirah, we talk in tens. And then when we get up to the Olam Habriya, the world of creation, which is where neshamos come from, where souls come from, then we're talking already in terms of hundreds. So when the Gemara says that the waves were 300 parsa high, it's coming to tell you that up in the world of Bria, counterbalancing the holy forces, are 300 forces of Tumah. However, the forces of Tumah, as a rule, don't join together. So the pasuk says, "Yispardu po'alei oven," the doers of iniquity will be separate. This is a whole lengthy discussion in its own, but evil tends to separate between people, whereas when it comes to goodness, the nature of goodness is to join and bring people together. So that's why there's a distance also of 300 parsa from one wave to the other, because the parcels, the waves, never unite. And actually, the Machne Yisrael, the camp of Israel that's in the world of Bria, and again, we said the camp of Israel down here in this world is 3 parsos in size, but up there, it's going to be 300 parsos, and they keep the waves of the forces of evil apart from one another. This time, they're not traveling in a boat. As we pointed out, it just says they're going along the way. And the reason is, the way Rav Kook explains it, is because they're not in the sea of wisdom in this time. Because these forces are in the world of the Sitra Achra, the world of the other side, where there's no water, which is a metaphor for Torah, in which they can swim. Everything's all dried up, and they can see the effects of the forces of evil. They find a small star. The small star is a soul, a holy soul that was captured by the klipos, that was captured by the forces of impurity. And that's what they're seeing in terms of the small star, and it's sitting in a bed with the mustard seeds. Because the Gemara tells us that bees like to eat mustard. The Gemara says in Bava Basra that if somebody has a mustard patch growing on their ground, so if you want to start beekeeping, there's a certain distance away from the mustard patch that you have to set up your bees in order they don't come and start eating all the mustard. So over here also this Jewish soul, which is surrounded by bees. We know that bees are a metaphor for the enemies of Klal Yisrael, as we mentioned in Hallel about Savavuni Kidvorim, that the enemies have surrounded me like bees, and they want to feed off this holy soul in order to take the spiritual powers for their own evil. It's only 40 in the tens, but it doesn't get all the way up to the hundreds, because the fact of the matter is that evil cannot really reach a person's neshama. Kabbalah tells us that there's 5 levels of the soul, and the lowest 3 are nefesh, ruach, and neshama. And a person's nefesh, a person's ruach, the 2 lowest levels, they can be affected by somebody's evil. But a person's neshama, elokai neshama shenasata b'tahorahi, that the soul that Hashem has put into us is holy and is pure and remains holy and pure at all times. That never changes. So therefore, it's only 40 sa'ah of the mustard, because the effects of the evil only goes up to the 2nd level, but not all the way up to the 3rd level, which, as we explained earlier, would be expressed in hundreds. And when you see these forces of evil, the best way to deal with them is to minimize one's involvement with them or minimize even looking at them. That's why it says that if we would get too close, we would be burned. But as much as they can harm a person has a way out. because they can't stop a person from changing if towards evil, as long as the person doesn't want to be. And as long as a person believes that he has the ability to fight these forces, he can fight the forces. So there's that, so to speak, line in the sand that the Gemara described, which is how far these forces can go and no further, as long as the person is not prepared to allow them to. We will stop here in the Mirza Hashem. In our next shir, we will see how Rebbe Nachman understands this Gemara.